The entrance to the Magnolia Foundation Gala buzzed with quiet chatter and flashing cameras. Security guards in dark suits flanked the velvet ropes, nodding approvingly as luxury cars pulled up and guests in glittering gowns and sharp tuxedos stepped out. Emma Carson, carrying a small beige purse and wearing a modest floral dress, walked toward the entrance with a polite smile. She clutched her printed invitation tightly between her fingers, the edges slightly crumpled from the nervous way she'd held it all the way from the cab. The head of security, a tall man with a clipped haircut, spotted her from several feet away. His brow immediately tightened as he took in her appearance. He shifted his weight, adjusting his tie, and stepped into her path before she could reach the rope. "Ma'am, this event is for invited guests only," he said, voice raised just enough to draw curious glances from the nearby crowd. Emma stopped, maintaining her calm. She offered the invitation forward with both hands. "I have the invite, sir." Her voice was steady, respectful. The guard glanced at the card but didn't take it. Instead, he turned his head slightly and gestured sharply to someone behind the rope. A woman in a sleek black dress, clipboard in hand, hurried over. Her heels clicked sharply against the marble ground, with one sweeping glance up and down Emma's outfit. The event coordinator's lips tightened into a thin, judgmental line. She didn't even look at the invitation. "I'm sorry," the coordinator said loudly so others nearby could hear. "This event has a dress code. We have standards to maintain." Her tone wasn't angry. It was worse, dismissive, clinical, as if Emma's very presence were an inconvenience. The guests, waiting their turn to check in, shifted subtly. Some exchanged amused looks. Others tilted their heads toward the scene, whispering behind manicured hands and champagne glasses. Emma felt the weight of a dozen casual judgments pressing down on her, but she stood her ground, her posture straight, her smile never faltering. The guard moved closer, his hand hovering near her elbow without touching, a clear invitation to leave. "I'll have to ask you to step aside, ma'am." His voice was firm now, procedural. Emma nodded once, silent, and took a step back from the rope. She tucked the invitation back into her purse slowly, making no sudden movements, as if any wrong step might give them more reason to be rough. The murmurs grew louder. A woman in a diamond necklace snickered into her wine glass. A young man, in a velvet blazer, leaned closer to his date, whispering something that made her smirk behind her hand. At the edge of the valet station, a teenager in a navy uniform watched the scene unfold. He had just finished parking a gleaming white sports ET Abiliard car and was wiping his hands on a clean towel, but his eyes lingered on Emma. Unlike the others, his expression wasn't amused or judgmental. It was sympathetic, almost protective. He shifted his stance, as if debating whether to step forward, but stayed put, unnoticed by the security team and the chattering guests. Emma offered the guard a small, graceful nod, turned, and began walking, away without a single backward glance. The crowd quickly lost interest, returning to their conversations and selfies, their attention span for public humiliation spent as quickly as it had flared. The night pressed around Emma as she moved past. The glowing entrance, her heels clicking lightly on the polished stone. The simple fabric of her dress fluttered slightly in the evening breeze, a quiet defiance against the sea of shimmering designer gowns she left behind. The valet boy kept watching until she disappeared down the sidewalk, his hands tightening into fists at his sides. Inside the gala, music floated through the air, and the warm glow of chandeliers promised a night of celebration and self-congratulation. Outside, a woman in a simple floral dress walked away with her dignity intact, even if no one inside the velvet ropes had bothered to see it. Emma moved gracefully away from the entrance, her shoes clicking softly against the sidewalk. She didn't argue, didn't plead. She simply offered a small "thank you" over her shoulder, the words catching in the evening air. Her head stayed high, her back straight, but every step felt heavier than the last. The laughter, the clinking of champagne, glasses. The distant beats of music from inside the gala seemed to chase after her, reminders of a world she had just been pushed out of. Past the luxury cars lined like trophies along the curb, she spotted a small public bench nestled under a decorative tree. She made her way over, settling down carefully, smoothing the fabric of her dress over her knees. Her hands rested in her lap, fingers folding neatly together as if maintaining poise could somehow shield her from the sting spreading through her chest. A few feet away, a group of guests exited the gala, their laughter high-pitched and careless. Among them, a woman dripping in jewelry glanced at Emma, then leaned towards her companion. Her voice, though lowered, carried easily across the quiet street. "Next time, shop before you show up," she said, her words sharp as glass and twice as cutting. The group tittered and disappeared into a waiting limousine, the door shutting with a cushioned thud that seemed to seal Emma's exclusion. Emma inhaled slowly, the floral scent of nearby planters mixing with the faint exhaust from idling luxury. Cars. She shifted slightly on the bench, her fingers brushing against the strap of her purse. As she reached inside to check the invitation she had so carefully preserved, her gaze caught on a flash of white near a trash can beside the entrance. There, half crumpled and stained by a muddy footprint, lay her invitation. The gold lettering, once so carefully embossed, now barely gleamed under the streetlights. A small crease ran through her family name, like a deliberate insult stamped into the paper. She stayed seated, unwilling to give the crowd the satisfaction of seeing her retrieve it. Instead, she tightened her grip on the bench edge, grounding herself against the wave of humiliation threatening to drown her. Around her, engines revved, photographers shouted for the next glamorous arrival, and the velvet ropes fluttered lightly. In the breeze, each gust feeling like another gentle push away from the world she had been promised a place in. Just beyond the valet station, movement stirred. A large black SUV, polished to a mirror shine, glided up the drive with a quiet authority that drew subtle glances from the staff. The teenage valet who had watched Emma earlier straightened immediately, abandoning his casual stance. Two security guards shifted positions, adjusting their jackets, suddenly more alert. No announcements, no flashing cameras, yet there was a weight to the SUV's arrival that pulled the energy of the evening toward it, like a silent pivot no one wanted to miss. The tinted windows hid the passengers inside, but the reaction of the staff made it clear. Whoever was in that vehicle mattered, far more than the laughing socialites drifting in and out of the entrance. Emma noticed the shift, though she didn't move from her place. She sat still, a quiet figure among the thrum of opulence, her simple dress and small purse looking even more out of place against the backdrop of glittering gowns and polished shoes. The breeze picked up again, lifting a loose strand of her hair across her face. She tucked it behind her ear, her movements slow, composed, determined to show none of the hurt roiling underneath her careful exterior. From her vantage point, she could see the valet boy hurrying forward to open the SUV's door, his hand trembling just slightly as he reached for the handle. The black vehicle remained still, its engine humming low, like a giant beast deciding when to strike. The guests, still lingering nearby, began to take notice, their laughter dying down into speculative murmurs. Some shifted closer, hoping to catch a glimpse of whoever was inside. Emma lowered her gaze to her lap, tracing the seams of her dress absent-mindedly. She didn't need to see the new arrival to know she didn't belong here tonight. Yet, even as she sat surrounded by indifference and mockery, there was a quiet resilience in her posture, a silent refusal to be broken by a room full of strangers who had mistaken wealth for worth. Across the street, another valet rushed to clear a spot, nearly tripping over himself in his eagerness. The SUV's driver, a man in a simple black suit, stepped out and did a quick scan of the surroundings. His eyes swept past the crowds, past the velvet ropes, lingering briefly, almost imperceptibly, on the bench where Emma sat. Then he moved to the rear door, his hand poised to open it. The gala entrance seemed to pause collectively, holding its breath for the reveal. The woman at the door, the same coordinator who had dismissed Emma earlier, smoothed her hair nervously and adjusted the badge clipped to her designer dress. The security guard who had turned Emma away now stood a little straighter, his earlier smugness replaced by stiff professionalism. Emma remained seated, unmoving, watching without truly watching, feeling the tension stretch around her like a taut wire ready to snap. Somewhere in the depths of that polished black SUV, something, or someone, was about to shift the night's careful balance. She didn't know how yet. She only knew the air had changed, and for once, it wasn't pushing her away. Emma shifted slightly on the bench, the cool evening air brushing against her arms. Around her, the gala continued its swirl of glitter and chatter, indifferent to the quiet figure sitting just beyond its velvet borders. She didn't move, too, rejoin them. She didn't try to force her way back inside. Instead, she sat with a stillness that seemed to set her apart, even more than her simple dress ever could. A few minutes passed, and then the valet boy she had noticed earlier approached, moving cautiously like someone who wasn't sure if kindness would be welcome. He stopped a few feet away, holding out a small plastic bottle of water. His uniform was neat but slightly oversized, the sleeves brushing his wrists. "Here," he said quietly, not meeting her eyes at first. "You might need this." Emma looked up, surprised, then accepted the bottle with a soft, "Thank you." The boy, whose name tag read Liam, shifted awkwardly from foot to foot. "I'm sorry about them," he mumbled, jerking his head toward the entrance. "Not everyone in there's worth impressing anyway." Emma smiled faintly, the kind of smile that carried 1,000 unspoken words. She unscrewed the bottle and took a small sip, grateful for the simple gesture. Liam hesitated, then sat on the far edge of the bench, keeping a respectful distance. He pulled off his valet cap, running a hand through his unruly hair. "It's always like this," he said under his breath. "They act like the clothes make the person. Half of them couldn't find the exit if their driver wasn't waiting outside." Emma chuckled softly, a genuine sound that surprised even herself. For the first time that night, the tightness in her chest loosened just a little. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear and murmured, "Maybe they're right. I'm clearly out of place." Liam shook his head firmly. "Nah, they just forgot what real looks like." His words hung in the air, warm and unexpected. Across the entrance, another group of guests exited the gala, their laughter too loud, their smiles too sharp. One woman, her dress shimmering like liquid gold, pointed directly at Emma and whispered something to her friends. They all laughed, the sound cutting through the night like a jagged blade. Emma straightened her shoulders, ignoring the sting. She took another sip of water and pressed the bottle against her palm, grounding herself. Liam scowled at the laughing group, but said nothing. His loyalty was silent but solid, and somehow it mattered more than any apology from the people inside ever could. A black SUV still idled a few feet away, its windows tinted so dark they reflected the glittering lights of the gala. Liam glanced over his shoulder at it, lowering his voice. "You know," he said, "those are the people who actually matter." He jerked his chin subtly toward the SUV. "Not the ones inside pretending." Emma followed his gaze, her eyes settling on the still vehicle. She said nothing, but the shift in energy was unmistakable. Even from across the street, she could see how the security guards fidgeted, how the coordinator smoothed her dress for the third time, how the crowd's laughter dimmed into something closer to nervous anticipation. Liam stood up, adjusting his cap back onto his head. "I got to get back before they notice I'm gone, but I hope your night turns around, ma'am." He gave her a quick, shy smile, then jogged back across the driveway, weaving expertly between polished cars and polished people. Emma watched him go, the corners of her mouth lifting slightly. She set the half-empty water bottle beside her on the bench and folded her hands neatly again. The bench creaked slightly under her as she leaned back, observing without being part of the scene unfolding around her. The SUV's driver, a man in a crisp black suit, moved to the rear door. He paused there, scanning the crowd with the careful attention of someone accustomed to measuring a room before stepping into it. A murmur ran through the nearest guests, and a few even began inching closer, drawn by curiosity they couldn't suppress. Slowly, almost ceremoniously, the driver opened the rear door. The light from the street lamps spilled into the darkened interior, catching the gleam of polished shoes as a figure shifted inside. Then, with deliberate calm, a distinguished older man stepped out. He wore a charcoal grey suit, perfectly tailored, and moved with a confidence that didn't need loud declarations or flashing cameras. His silver hair was combed neatly back, his face lined with the kind of authority that only years of earned respect could bring. He straightened to his full height and surveyed the entrance with sharp, discerning eyes. his gaze slicing cleanly through the pretense that clung to the gala like an expensive perfume. The security guards immediately stiffened to attention. The event coordinator nearly stumbled in her heels trying to reach him first. The scattered guests who had been lingering outside the gala began to whisper, their previous mockery forgotten in the face of real influence. Emma remained seated on her bench, the fabric of her floral dress catching the breeze once again. She watched the man's arrival quietly, unnoticed by the flurry of movement now surrounding the SUV. There was no announcement, no red carpet, yet the entire atmosphere bent around the newcomer, shifting subtly but undeniably. The older man took a few slow steps forward, hands loosely clasped behind his back. His eyes swept across the crowd, assessing, searching. He moved with the ease of someone who had long since stopped caring about first impressions because he knew they were always second to substance. The gala's velvet ropes fluttered in the wind, forgotten for a moment as all attention focused on the man who had just arrived. The security guards exchanged nervous glances. The coordinator smoothed her hair again, the clipboard clutched tightly against her side. Somewhere nearby, a photographer lowered his camera, sensing instinctively that this wasn't a moment for flashing lights, but for quiet observation. Emma remained perfectly still, the breeze brushing across her cheek, carrying with it the faint scent of jasmine and city air. Whatever was about to happen, it had already begun the moment the door opened and the old man stepped into the night. The event coordinator clutched her clipboard tighter as she caught sight of the distinguished older man stepping onto the gala driveway. A visible wave of panic crossed her carefully made-up face. She adjusted her necklace in a frantic motion and darted forward, weaving through clusters of guests without her usual polished grace. Her heels clicked unevenly across the polished stone, urgency overriding her poise. A few guests turned their heads, sensing her desperation, the false veneer of calm starting to crack. The older man didn't even glance at her as she approached. His attention was fixed elsewhere, cutting through the crowd with an unseen tether. His steps were purposeful, unhurried, but every stride carried the weight of authority that made those in his path instinctively move aside. The coordinator, breathless now, reached him and gave a strained smile, extending a hand as if to steer him politely toward the red carpet. "Mr. Greystone, we're honored by your arrival. If you'd just—" He walked past her as if she hadn't spoken, his gaze fixed beyond the gala entrance, past the velvet ropes, across the street where a lone figure sat quietly on a public bench. The air seemed to shift again, a collective drawing in of breath from the guests, security, even the staff. People instinctively turned to follow his line of sight. Conversations halted mid-sentence. The photographers lowered their cameras in confusion. Emma sat still, her hands folded neatly in her lap, unaware at first that the storm of attention was now centered entirely on her. She adjusted the strap of her purse absent-mindedly, her eyes lingering on the half-empty bottle of water beside her. It wasn't until she heard the change in the crowd's rhythm, the murmurs turning sharper, the shuffling of feet growing closer, that she looked up. Mr. Greystone crossed the street without hesitation, his polished shoes silent against the pavement. The distance between the velvet ropes and the public bench shrank with every deliberate step he took. Behind him, the coordinator remained frozen in place, her clipboard drooping slightly, her mouth opening and closing without sound. No one dared follow him. Even the most self-important guests understood instinctively that something was unfolding far beyond their social games. As Mr. Greystone approached, Emma stood, smoothing her dress with a slow, measured hand. She didn't shrink back or step forward. She simply rose, dignity wrapped around her like a second skin. She held his gaze calmly, even as a hush fell over the entire front of the gala. When he reached her, Mr. Greystone stopped a respectful distance away. For a heartbeat, they simply looked at each other. Then he gave a small but unmistakable bow of his head, not the stiff nod of polite obligation, but a gesture heavy with genuine respect. His voice, when he spoke, was warm and clear, carrying easily to the stunned onlookers nearby. "Ma'am," he said simply. It was one word, but it cracked the fragile facade of the gathered crowd. Whispers rippled outward like shockwaves. The same people who had sneered at Emma's dress and dismissed her with careless glances now craned their necks for a better view, their curiosity battling with disbelief. The coordinator's clipboard slipped from her fingers, hitting the ground with a soft, defeated clatter. Emma smiled, a quiet, radiant expression that transformed her face completely. She dipped her head slightly in return, not with deference, but with the poise of someone who understood exactly who she was and needed no confirmation from anyone else. She didn't gloat. She didn't scowl. She didn't look back at the entrance with vindication or anger. Her grace was the loudest statement she could have made. Mr. Greystone extended an arm toward her, an unspoken invitation. Without hesitation, Emma accepted, slipping her hand lightly onto his offered elbow. Together, they turned back toward the entrance of the gala, the same velvet ropes that had earlier served as barriers, now parting without a single word of resistance. Guests shuffled backward instinctively, creating a wide, silent path. The murmurs faded into stunned silence. Security guards stepped aside, their faces a study in barely concealed confusion and regret. Even the photographers, sensing the importance of the moment, refrained from blinding them with flashes, opting instead for long, respectful glances. As they passed the event coordinator, Emma's eyes met hers for the briefest second. There was no malice in her expression, no satisfaction. Just a steady, unflinching gaze that made the coordinator lower her own eyes first, her hands twisting uselessly at her sides. Inside the grand hall, the chandeliers sparkled with 1,000 tiny lights, casting a golden glow across marble floors and towering floral arrangements. But none of it compared to the quiet brilliance of the woman in the simple floral dress walking confidently beside the man everyone else had scrambled to impress. Emma felt the shift in the air, but she didn't let it change her. She stayed exactly who she had been when she arrived, composed, kind, and impossibly strong. Her silent commitment was written in every graceful step she took, a vow that no matter how the world judged her exterior, it would never define her worth. Not tonight. Not ever. The room seemed to shift as Emma and Mr. Greystone entered, the energy pulling toward them like gravity. Murmured guesses and hasty whispers bounced between clusters of guests. Some clutched their glasses tighter, others pretended to check their phones to mask their curiosity, but all eyes followed them. The velvet ropes were forgotten entirely. No one dared stop them now. Inside the grand ballroom, the soft clink of glasses and low hum of conversation faltered as the two made their way to the center. Near the stage, a microphone stood unattended. Mr. Greystone released Emma's arm gently and stepped forward with the steady confidence of a man who knew the weight of his words before he spoke them. A few staff members scrambled to adjust the microphone height as he approached, but he waved them off with a polite, minimal gesture. He didn't need staging. He needed only truth. He cleared his throat lightly, the sound immediately commanding the attention of the entire room. The music faded into silence. Guests froze, glasses halfway to lips, conversations snapping shut mid-sentence. For those of you who may not recognize her, Mr. Greystone began, his voice strong and sure. It is my great honor to welcome Miss Emma Carson here tonight. He paused, scanning the crowd with a gaze that left no space for disrespect. She is not just a guest. She is part of the foundation upon which this very organization stands. A ripple went through the crowd. Emma remained standing quietly at his side, her posture composed, her hands lightly clasped in front of her. Many of you know the Magnolia Foundation's history in passing, Charles continued. What you may not know is that in its earliest, hardest days, when there were no sparkling galas or headline sponsors, when charity was truly a matter of sacrifice, it was Emma's grandmother, Eleanor Carson, who opened her home, her table, and her heart to build what we have today. Gasps sounded across the ballroom, small but sharp, as realization sank in. A few guests turned visibly pale, their previous dismissal of Emma replaying in their minds with fresh shame. Eleanor Carson was not a woman of extravagance, Charles said, his voice thickening slightly with emotion. She believed that compassion, not appearance, was the measure of worth. And tonight, her granddaughter stands here, not draped in jewels or hidden behind titles, but carrying that same spirit, unchanged by time or pretense. Cameras emerged now, but not for the reasons they usually did. This wasn't about gossip or glamour anymore. This was history being acknowledged. Several guests scrambled to lift their phones, recording the moment with shaky hands, desperate, to pretend they had understood her importance all along. Charles turned slightly, gesturing for Emma to step closer. She moved forward with a grace so natural it made the chandeliers above seem almost gaudy in comparison. He reached into his pocket and produced a small velvet-lined box, opening it to reveal a delicate pin, the original insignia of the Magnolia Foundation, designed decades ago but rarely awarded. In honor of the Carson family's legacy, Charles said, fastening the pin to the strap of Emma's floral dress. And for reminding us tonight what real dignity looks like, we recognize Emma Carson as our honorary guest and friend. The room erupted, not into wild applause, but into a long, respectful ovation that carried a weight far greater than noise. Emma felt the sound wash over her like a tide, steady and sure. At the back of the room, near the entrance, Liam stood, with a valet's careful posture, watching the scene unfold. His grin widened slowly, pride glowing openly on his young face. He had seen her before anyone else bothered to look. Now the entire room was catching up. The event coordinator, pale and trembling, pushed through the crowd, her heels slipping awkwardly on the marble floor. She reached Emma breathlessly, clutching the clipboard against her chest like a shield. "Miss Carson," she stammered, voice wobbling. I am so terribly sorry for the misunderstanding. If there's anything you need, please." Emma turned to her calmly, her smile warm but unyielding. "Thank you," she said. Simply, her tone polite, but carrying an unmistakable finality. She didn't humiliate the woman. She didn't scold or correct her publicly. She simply accepted the apology with a level of grace that made the coordinator flush deeper with shame. Without waiting for more excuses, Emma turned back toward the center of the room, now fully hers. The security guards who had blocked her path earlier stood rigidly near the walls, avoiding her gaze. Guests parted for her without hesitation now, eager to offer smiles, handshakes, anything to realign themselves with the woman they had so easily dismissed just an hour ago. But Emma wasn't here for their approval. She had already won the only validation that mattered. Charles Greystone offered her his arm once more, and together they made their way toward the head table at the front of the ballroom. This time no velvet rope barred her way, no whisper questioned her right to belong. Only open doors, open eyes, and a path cleared by the undeniable truth of who she was. From his post by the entrance, Liam gave a small, satisfied nod. He didn't need to be part of the gala to know he had witnessed something rare, a quiet revolution that didn't need revenge or spectacle to be complete. Just the unwavering strength of a woman who knew her own worth long before anyone else remembered it. The atmosphere inside the ballroom had shifted into something softer, heavier with meaning. Conversations resumed, but their tone was different now, filled with cautious respect. Emma moved through the crowd with Charles Greystone at her side, a new kind of attention following her. Not the curious, judgmental glances from earlier, but something more genuine, something earned. As they reached the head table, the event coordinator, still clutching her clipboard like a lifeline, slipped from the sidelines and approached once more. This time, her steps were careful, almost hesitant. She managed a tight smile, lowering her voice to avoid attracting more attention. "Miss Carson," she began, forcing a brittle pleasantness into her tone, "I just want to say, there was absolutely no disrespect intended earlier. You have to understand, in my role, I have to uphold certain standards. It wasn't personal." Her hands fluttered as she spoke, gesturing vaguely toward the elegant surroundings as if they might serve as a reasonable excuse. Emma turned to her fully, her expression composed but unreadable. For a moment, she let the woman's nervous apology hang in the air between them, heavy and awkward. Then she smiled, not coldly, not cruelly, but with a firm, quiet dignity that needed no embellishment. "A simple dress," Emma said, her voice calm but cutting through the noise around them. "Never hides real worth. You just weren't looking." The coordinator's mouth opened slightly as if to argue, but the words never came. She lowered her gaze, her fingers tightening around the clipboard, then backed away without another word, folding herself into the anonymous buzz of the crowd. Emma turned back toward the head table, where Charles was waiting with a patient smile. He stepped forward and clinked his glass gently with a spoon, drawing the attention of the room once again. The music softened, and a hush fell naturally over the guests. "If I may," Charles said, his voice steady but carrying a warmth that reached the edges of the grand ballroom, "I would like to propose a toast." He lifted his glass, and slowly, respectfully, the guests around the room mirrored his movement. He paused, his gaze finding Emma across the table, then lifted it to sweep across the assembled crowd. "To Eleanor Carson, a woman who taught us that humility, kindness, and unwavering strength build legacies that no title, no gown, no fortune can ever outshine." He lowered his glass slightly, his voice deepening. "And to her granddaughter, Emma, who tonight reminded all of us what it truly means to honor that legacy." There was no applause yet, no outburst of noise. Instead, a wave of emotion swept through the room, thick and palpable. Glasses rose higher. Eyes softened. A few guests even shifted uncomfortably, the weight of their earlier judgments settling on their shoulders like an invisible cloak. Emma accepted the toast with a small, graceful nod, blinking back the intensity of the moment without losing her composure. Charles took a sip from his glass, and one by one, the crowd followed, the act binding them together not with pomp, but with genuine, unspoken understanding. As the toast ended, guests who had barely noticed her before now approached, with tentative smiles and outstretched hands. A man in a sharp grey suit offered her a sincere congratulations. A woman in an emerald gown, earlier seen whispering behind Emma's back, now apologized quietly, her cheeks tinged with embarrassment. Emma received them all with the same quiet grace, accepting handshakes, returning smiles, but never once allowing the sudden flood of approval to change her grounded presence. She was the same woman who had sat alone on a public bench only an hour earlier. Only now, the world around her was beginning to catch up. Across the room. Liam the valet stood by the entrance, his posture relaxed now, a wide grin lighting up his young face. He caught Emma's eye just for a second and gave her a subtle thumbs up before slipping back into his work, unnoticed by the glittering crowd, but acknowledged in that brief glance by the person who mattered most. The music rose again, but softer. This time, a smooth jazz melody filling the corners of the grand space. Emma found herself drawn into a few conversations, not by obligation, but by genuine curiosity. Guests asked about her grandmother, about the early days of the foundation. Emma spoke warmly, sharing small, honest stories that made the marble, walls and towering floral displays feel a little less imposing, a little more human. Charles remained close, stepping back only when he saw Emma standing tall on her own, no longer needing a shield. His presence had opened the door, but her own dignity had made them walk through it. As the evening wore on, a quiet pride settled over the ballroom, different from the flashy, performative energy of earlier. It was real now. Earned, and at its center stood Emma, the woman in the simple floral dress who had never needed diamonds or headlines to shine. The golden glow from the chandeliers bathed the ballroom in soft, almost reverent light as Charles Greystone stepped back up to the microphone. Once more, the gentle clink of glasses quieted into complete silence as he cleared his throat, the crowd instinctively understanding that the night was not quite over. His hand, steady and sure, reached for a small, beautifully crafted plaque resting on the podium. With a warm smile, he turned to Emma, who still stood a few feet away, the simple floral dress she wore catching the light in a way no jewel ever could. He extended his hand toward her with a slight nod. Emma moved forward, her steps calm and unhurried. There was no rush, no performance, just grace. As she climbed the small set of steps to the stage, a hush fell over the room, deeper than any that had come before. She reached Charles's side, and for a moment he said nothing, simply placing the plaque into her hands with the care of someone passing on something sacred, The inscription gleamed under the lights. In honor of Eleanor Carson's legacy, a spirit of humility, strength, and true grace. Emma blinked once, steadying herself against the wave of emotion that rose inside her. She held the plaque close, her fingers tracing the familiar name etched into the polished wood, and then turned to face the crowd. One by one, as if led by an invisible conductor, the guests rose to their feet. The applause that followed wasn't the shallow, scattered kind that often filled rooms like this. It was real, full-bodied, swelling with meaning. It started slowly, then built into a powerful, resonant wave that filled the grand hall and wrapped itself around Emma like a warm embrace. There were no flashing cameras blinding her now, no whispers of judgment carried on the breeze. Only faces, softened with understanding, hands clapping in sincere recognition of a spirit that no designer label could manufacture. No dress, no diamond, no polished title had ever truly mattered. What mattered stood before them, in a simple dress and a heart full of quiet strength. Across the room, near the entrance where the grandness of the evening melted into the everyday world, Liam stood in his valet uniform, shoulders back, clapping harder than anyone else. His smile was broad, unguarded, proud in a way that didn't seek attention. He watched Emma with the satisfaction of knowing he had seen her long before anyone else had bothered to look. Emma glanced toward him briefly, and though the distance between them was wide, the look they shared closed it instantly. A silent thank you passed between them, one that needed no words. He dipped his head slightly, an almost imperceptible bow, then kept clapping, not caring who noticed or what they thought. Back on the stage, Charles lifted his glass once more, signaling a final moment of unity among the guests. Emma remained composed, her smile natural, carrying both her pride and her memories onto that stage with her. The gala, the evening, the entire event bent around her now, not because she demanded it, but because she had quietly earned it. The music returned, softer and richer this time, blending into the emotional current that ran through the hall. Guests began stepping forward, eager to meet her, to thank her, to offer words they should have spoken hours earlier. Emma welcomed them with the same gentle warmth she had carried all night, listening intently, offering kind smiles, but never losing herself in the attention. She wasn't here for applause or approval. She was here because of something much deeper, something no glittering ballroom could give or take away. Outside the gala doors, the world went on. Cars driving past, streetlights flickering in the cooling air. But inside, something had shifted permanently. Tonight wasn't just about charity or tradition. It was about memory, legacy, and the quiet power of being true to oneself when the world demands otherwise. The crowd slowly relaxed. Again, conversations picking up in gentler tones, laughter returning in a softer, more genuine way. But every so often, glances still drifted toward the woman in the simple dress, the one who had reminded them all that worth could not be worn. It had to be lived. As Emma stood among them, the final voiceover rose naturally from the heart of the moment, wrapping around the audience with a message as lasting as the evening itself. They judged her dress, not knowing the heart behind it. She showed them that real elegance never needs approval. And finally, as the screen softened into the golden glow of the ballroom, a warm final call to action flowed in seamlessly. If you enjoyed this emotional journey, please like and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring true stories like this.